Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Custom Resources in Chef Client 12.5. My name is Jamie Bright, and I'll be your host. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, John Keiser. John is a Principal Engineer here at Chef, and today he'll be introducing the concept of a custom resource, why you would want to write one, introduce you to the language concepts, and walk you through a tutorial of how to make your own. I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover quickly before we get started. Today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session, accessible through the same link you're using now. We'd also love to hear from you during today's session. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to send those along at any time using the Ask a Questions tab on the top of your screen. For those of you just joining, welcome to today's session, Custom Resources in Chef Client 12.5, presented by John Keiser. Let's get started by filling everybody in. John, what is a custom resource?
Hi there. So a custom resource is a way for you to write the same kind of resources that you're used to being available from Chef. So a common kind of problem is when you're writing a resource, and let me start by bringing up so a common kind of problem when you're making a custom resource or when you're writing recipes is that you will be repeating a whole lot of stuff a lot of the time, and you're also talking about things at a level that it's sometimes hard to tell exactly what you're doing. You're updating several files and a template, and you're restarting a service, and it turns out all that stuff is really bundled in one operation, which is the clean house on my database recipe. And so custom resources are a way to bundle all of that stuff up and reuse it in multiple places. So by bundling it up, it means it's sort of like making it a macro. Like if, for example, if you're saying, if you put something in your recipe that looks like this, and you have, mode 755, and you guys have all done this. Keiser group, hi, and put some content in there, and then you go service. Like actually, let's make this even nicer. We could say var www.site1/index.html. And that's a very basic example, but one that nonetheless you do a whole lot. Probably most of you here, if you have done many chef recipes, have actually done this. So this is a lot of stuff to write, and everybody's recipe gets even bigger than this. A custom resource is a way to do something, what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not going to get too in-depth into it right now because there's going to be some people joining a little bit late, so I'm just going to try to overview it. But your goal is to make a resource that's sort of like my website, site one, maybe we could say homepage is high. And so if the homepage ever changes, then we want to restart the HTTPD because this particular HTTP is terrible at handling static files or something. Basically, we have things that we want to set up. We're going to probably set up the service if it's not there. And we're going to have things like an htaccess file and all sorts of things that you do in website. So our goal is to be able to write this recipe. And even more than that, now you should be able to do this and say, okay, I got another one of these. And homepage is a different homepage. And that's the second bit of a resource. The first bit is that you can take things that you've already written and that you've repeated a whole bunch of times, right? Like we would have to write that several times in order to get it to, like, this is what a recipe might look like right now, right? And we want to clean all of this stuff up, put it into a custom resource so that we can write this in a recipe, and when people are looking at a recipe, they can understand what it is we're doing. And also so that we can kind of hide and twiddle the details, and we don't have to worry about if someone realizes, oh, security fix to CC644, and they forget to, like, we don't want them to forget to change that one. And if we put in the custom resource, since we're not repeating the logic, the change can be made once and it will apply to all instances of the resource. So that's the basic problem that we're trying to solve. Now, you've always been able to make custom resources in Chef. They were called HWRPs and LWRPs, and there were several different ways to make them. And all of them were sort of, all of them were kind of hard. So forgive me, I'm not sure how to get my presentation to show up in the main, or like on this desktop that I'm sharing, but I will just show up the PowerPoint as big as it can be. So for visual, like in Chef 12.5, we've majorly revamped how you can do them. We haven't dropped support for anything that already exists, to be clear, but we've made it a whole lot easier to understand and get into writing a custom resource, make it possible to dash one off quickly, and make it so you don't have to learn a whole lot of new things, like in order to wire up all the glue to make a resource. Most of it's done automatically for you now. Try to reduce the conceptual overhead, make this as easy as possible, because we think it's one of the best tools you have for creating reusable components in Chef. Now, it is worth talking about, and I'm going to start back from the beginning in a minute and go through this quickly again. But it's worth noting that the terms LWRP and HWRP are no longer used. They're just custom resources. And a big part of that is that we are no longer, like the requirement that you create both a resource and a provider, the RP part of that used to exist, was one of the stumbling blocks for a lot of users who wanted to just dash off a quick resource. So we don't require you to create the provider anymore. And so that's why it's just a resource. For those of you who don't know how to make a resource in existing Chef, don't worry about what used to be there. Those of you who do, I'm gonna skim over what the differences are and show you how the new stuff works, and you will see very quickly that how much simpler it is than before. Still, all code written the old way is still supported. It's still compatible with Chef 12.5, so you don't have to rush out and change all your cookbooks. So let's get into it. Just to start back over, I want to go visually into the let's go visually into a cookbook. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll copy this stuff because I don't have it. But let's do what you normally do to make a cookbook, which is we'll go in here and Chef. So I've got my little repository right here where I run Chef. I'm planning to do this in local mode because the focus here is not on uploading cookbooks and running them on multiple nodes right now. The focus is on the writing of the recipe and the testing it. So I'm just going to write it here locally and run it. So let's make a cookbook called My App, and it's going to install My App. And this is my repository here. So it just made a little cookbook for me. You're probably familiar with the format for a cookbook, and if you're not, There's a few things you can put in there. There's recipes and resources are the two ones that we're going to concentrate on today. And so in my recipe, that's where I'm writing all the stuff that that I do today. Like, say, if I want to build a website that has the word hi in it, I have a whole lot of boilerplate code that I have to go through, right? Like, there's a whole lot of stuff. Maybe it's wheel, who knows? There's a whole lot of stuff, and this is a very, very simple one. This is just an index.html and something that even just restarts the Apache. You really want something that's going to set up Apache, install the packages, make sure that all the stuff that needs to be there is there. So your recipe for just setting up one static site on Apache could get fairly large. But a lot of times you have very common, there's a lot of commonality between them. And further, there's a lot of times where you want to do it multiple times. So if I want to create both site 1 and site 2, which is here, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let me actually take the action. I've got here's something that does create site 1, and right now, if I'm not using a custom resource, and I want to make a site 2, I'm going to copy paste all that stuff and like hi from site 2, and most of this other stuff is going to stay the same. Now this is getting kind of ugly. It's a little bit hard to read. And even before I have a second version of it, it's kind of hard to read. What we'd like to do is use this nice pattern here that Chef has of a resource, a file resource, a service resource, but we'd like to make our own. And that's what custom resources is about. It's about taking the stuff that you're writing in recipes and packaging it in a form that's going to be easier, make your recipes easier to read, that's going to allow you to provide resources and services to other people on your team who may not be as intimately familiar with the details of how to set up permissions on Apache and things like that, but still are going to need to do some setup. And finally, to make it just easier for everyone to read and understand what's going on. So we want to encapsulate this logic. And here's the goal that we're going to go through, and now I'm going to go through writing a resource. But you always want to start with the goal. And our goal is to be able to write this. Heck, let's make it even nicer. We'll say title hi, because all of our web pages have nothing but a title in this example. There's going to be some level of, just to be able to show the show this with minimal distraction, going to be some level of smallness to the recipe that we're going to say. So yeah, I want to make a site 2, and that's going to say hi from site 2. I want to replace all this stuff, the file site 1, file site 2. Maybe I'm going to add an HT access, all that stuff. I want to replace all that stuff with this. So this is a whole lot cleaner to read. It's a whole lot easier to understand what's going on. How do we do it? Well, what we do when we want to make a custom resource is we make a resources directory inside of our cookbook. And we make a file, just dump a file in there. The resources directory shows at the same level as recipes. That has the name of the thing that we want to create. Now, just to be super clear, I've already created a resource now. Like, I could actually run this. It's going to fail because it doesn't understand what title is right now. But what we've just done is we have a cookbook named MyApp, and we created a resource named myapp_website. The name of the thing that you can reference in the recipe is always going to be the cookbook_resource name. Now, in order to fix some of these other things that we want, though, let's set the two properties that are, actually, let's copy the stuff that we want to do in, and we'll run our resource. I'm going to make a title property just so that it will compile. But I'm not going to change anything from our recipe yet. Action start. So what's happening here is I'm taking my recipe. I just took it verbatim out of the, I took the snippet that I want to encapsulate, that I want to reuse, out of the recipe and into an action. And you've probably seen these actions before when you say action : restart or notified : restart to a service. This is those actions. You can define multiple actions on a resource. The first one that you define will be the default. So if someone says, like we did, says my app website and doesn't specify an action, it's going to run this. So let's run it. And let's find out if I typed everything correct. So I'm going to run my app. This is just the -O is override run list so that I can just run the one cookbook that I want to run. And we'll see if I typed everything. Just a second. So actually, no, not just a second. We've revealed a bug in a recipe that we would have had to fix twice here. So what it just told me was that the parent directory for the file, var www site1, does not exist. This is actually a pretty good example. If I had wanted to, if I had found that out after I started doing this, I would have to to create this twice and liter the recipe with two of them. But now that I know, I just need to make sure I create the, sorry, it should be site1, site1 directory before I create the file. It's going to happen for both of the resources that we create. So yay. Oh, that's because I need to hit the save button. I've been hopping around between Windows and Mac, and I'm hitting Control S a whole lot more than I should. And so this is our debugging process. Whenever we have a recipe or a resource, when there's an error, we just go and look at it to see what it says. And in this case, I'm just not going to mess with it. I've got some kind of a the fact that I'm running as a non-root user. Generally, we run Chef Client as root, and I don't want to mess with those kind of problems right now. Let me make this bigger for you. You can type in, I don't know, like somewhere, if you're having issues with seeing this. So let somebody know. If you're not having issues, great. So this is what it did. It said it used the My App website resource, and it called action start. And My App website is right here. And like this is My App cookbook _ website and action start. And it ran this recipe. In fact, it did it twice. So when it ran this recipe, it shows, you see it indented a couple so that you know that this directory is part of the My App website, and the file is part of that My App website. You can always distinguish. So there's two My App websites at the top, and then all these resources are here. Oh, look, it even restarted the service. I apparently have an HTTP service on my machine. Yes. And you'll notice here, we have a bug because it's creating site1. We didn't modify anything. This is a good opportunity to talk about properties. Now, you'll notice I put this thing here, this property : title, and that was so that I could let the user type this. A property on a resource, it's just like, actually, I don't need to even type it here. A property on a resource works just like the properties that are in core Chef: mode, user, group. These are properties. A side note, for those who were creating providers in the old, in Chef These were called attributes. We have renamed them to property. The word attribute still works, but don't use it. Because of widespread confusion between resource properties and resource attributes and node attributes it was confusing people. So banish the thought, now that I put the thought in your head that resource attributes existed, they don't. Resources have properties, nodes have attributes, and they are just different things. So what this property is, we're going to say it's a string. I can give it a type to tell so that Ruby won't let a user pass in something like a number or true or false or something that I don't know what to do with. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to use the Ruby syntax for, I'm sure you guys have seen this thing, for embedding like a variable in a string. So, that's not the title that I want. I'm going to have property : site name, and that is going to be a string, and its name property true. So this is going to be something you're going to use a lot. And what it is it's a property of your resource that will be set when it will be set to this value, right here, by default. And the reason for that is if you've ever used the execute resource, you know you can do this, right? You can say execute ls /, and that'll work. But what you can also say list the root directory and say command /. Well, to the execute resource, it doesn't want to have to say, oh, let's see if he set the command, and if he didn't set the command, then we'll, sorry, command ls /. So like the execute resource at some point has to get the command that it's going to run. And when it does, it don't want to have to say, did they set the command? If not, then let me go get this thingy that they put up here in the name of the resource. That's what a name property is. Command will get set to, these will do the same thing. And because command is a name property. Now, in our case, the name property is going to be site name, and I'm going to put site name here. Okay, and so now we're fixing our bug where we didn't actually create a second thing. And let's fix the other bit, like we weren't setting the title. Actually, let's fix that, and we'll fix one thing at a time. So I'm going to rerun the exact same recipe, except now I have a property site name. What I expect to see is the My App website site1 talks to the directory var www site1 and creates that just like it did before. But here's the important thing. That second resource is the same resource type that you created here. But we have two different instances. And this second instance has its own resources with their own names, and they do their own job. This is a crucial part of reuse, is the ability to reuse something multiple times. So we still have something wrong. Like I'm not super happy with the fact that I put the hi title in there, because that's not the title that I specified in my recipe. I said I wanted to be hi from site 2. We know that. It's the title here. And so I'll run this one more time with that. So this is, we're just referencing the title here. And we're going to run this again. And what I expect is the only thing that should change is the content in hi. And that is what happened. Well, we restarted the service. And it changed to hi from site 2, just like it should. I'm going to do one final thing, which is, there's a security issue. This is another good reason that you want to be able to encapsulate all this huge number of behaviors that you have on these files. I don't want everyone to be able to read the file at all, because that title is sacrosanct to me. If someone else finds out what it is, then my business will collapse. So I need to set it to 640, and now you can see we've changed it to 640 on all of the instances of the resource. This is reused. This is the basics of custom resources. You can make another action if you want. You can make multiple resources by making another resource file. You can create a resource in a class by just extending from chef resource, for those of you that know Ruby, and they support inheritance and all that stuff. And there's a lot of other capabilities in here that I haven't talked about deeply. Like there's a whole lot of nice validation features. There's coercion. There's lazy defaults on the properties here. And there are some very nice facilities for helping you make custom Ruby resources, or like Ruby resources, where you're doing something like talking directly to an API rather than using resources, rather than writing a recipe. So I'm not going to like just cover those topics. I want to see what questions you guys have and talk about those. But this is writing a resource. Now let me go to the slide deck that I totally ignored, and let's find out if I left anything out. So the big, for those of you who weren't there at the beginning, the big thing was resources were a lot harder than now to create when we had the old thing with HWRPs and LWRPs. And one of the big improvements that we've made is to make it unnecessary to create a provider. But just to be clear, things written, and I see a question there, the old way of writing resources is not deprecated. We're going to support it. I don't see any path personally where we would actually remove it, because it's just not, like, it's a non-starter for us to break large numbers of recipes and community cookbooks. We want everybody to move forward and not backwards. Okay, so yeah, we've got new reusable abstractions, and this example that it's giving you, we'll put this up somewhere for you to look at. Jamie and I will talk about that more. But basically, your minimum contents of a resource are declare properties, write a block, declare the properties, and write one or more actions. An empty file can be a resource; it just will do nothing. No more providers. Attributes are now properties. Such thing as a resource attribute, and no such thing as LWRP or HWRP, or at least there's nothing to see here. Move along. Just there's only custom resources now. Multi-platform resources are going to be pretty easy to do with this, and we can talk about that pattern if you want. That used to be done with providers, and there's an actually nicer way to do it now. Usually you want to put helpers in your library cookbook, and the syntax is just a whole lot nicer. There's a whole lot of ceremony you don't have to deal with. We've done our example, and we talked about other topics. So let me go to questions. The first questions I see here: can a property be an extended feature? I think I'm going to need that question react, if you don't mind. Like I'm not sure what an extended feature is. So one of the earliest questions is, oh, hey, can I please increase the font size on my editor? So I'll tell you what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to increase the font size on my editor and leave it there while I'm talking. Yeah, I just painstakingly did that with the GUI for no good reason. Okay. Oh, I see a bunch of things that are, say, mark as unanswered. That must mean that they are answered. How do you write custom Ruby code with a resource? If you do that, how do you manage item potency? So custom Ruby code, there's a lot of things that we work with. Like, for example, chef provisioning, we created resources to manipulate AWS. Docker cookbook has resources to manipulate the Docker API. And these things talk using like non-item potent, non-resource code. There's like raw Ruby code that talks to an API. And there's a few big problems that you have to solve when you're doing something like that. If you just have a bunch of sub-resources, then you get a whole bunch of stuff for free that you're not thinking about. For example, you get test and set. Since you're using resources, the resources that Chef the Chef core resources are designed not to do any work unless work actually needs to be done. And that's what test and set is. Test and set is your resource needs to check if work needs to be done and do the work if it does need to be done. So that's one thing that you have to handle yourself if you're just talking to an API, because you don't want to like tell Docker to bring down an image and destroy it and recreate it every time that you come through a Chef recipe. So you got to check if the image looks like what you want, and if it does already, if it's there and if it exists and it looks like what you want, then you just leave the image there. Same with, so that it's the test and set behavior is one thing. Another one is there's tricky stuff around patchiness, where if users there's a lot of ways to do things. There's just a lot of ways to do things wrong. You can end up accidentally changing the mode of a file back to default, even when the user didn't tell you to change the mode, for example. And I can go into that in more detail later, but there are two helpers. One is load current resource, and the other is converge if changed. And these two work together to make it easy to make a custom resource. And again, if there's more questions later, I'll go into those specifically. There's documentation on what the methods do, and we can talk elsewhere if we don't have time for it. But basically, there's good tools to make custom Ruby resources a lot easier than they used to and a lot safer. One of the principles of the custom resources is that the easiest thing to write, the easiest resource to write, is the correctest resource. It should be harder to screw up than to do it. It should be hard to screw up and easy to do right. Hi, can the resource file be remote? You can use any Chef resource inside of an action. So yeah, you can make remote file and anything that you want. How do we upgrade the Chef clients on the dev workstation and the nodes? It's kind of a separate question that really, there's a Chef client cookbook that you can use to keep your Chef client up to date. So if you add that to your run list, it's a community cookbook. It's on the supermarket and it's maintained by Chef. And on the dev workstation, you should install the Chef DK. So go up to downloads.chef.io and click on Chef DK. It is awesome. It has not just the Chef client in it, but also Burke Shelf and Chef Spec and like all the testing tools like Kitchen and the blessed ecosystem tools that that people are used to using, all in a package that actually works across Windows, Mac, and everything. Can you specify that no action should be the default? You can't do that, but what you can do is say this. And what that means is like it won't give an error to the user, but like in this case, it won't give an error to the user. It will just do nothing. However, if you really want to tell the user you didn't specify action, right, you must specify action. You can do this, right? And since that's the first action, it's going to be the default. So when the user tries to run, actually, when we try to run the resource right now, it's going to blow up and tell us that we did not specify an action in the resource because we did not. So yeah, that's one way to do that. Share a resource across cookbooks. All of these are automatically shared across cookbooks. So the answer is, I think this question is getting at how do I make a reusable, like a set of resources that I want everybody on my team or my company to use or to share with other people in the community. And that's a key question, and it's actually one of the big ones that we're trying to target with this, is to make the community cookbooks better and more reusable, and to make it so you can make cookbooks that are shared across your team. So if you make a cookbook that has resources in it you don't even have to have recipes. In fact, that's what we recommend if you're going to make a fully reusable cookbook. Just make a cookbook that has just a resources directory, or maybe resources and libraries if you have helper functions. So like, yeah, just delete that thing. And in fact, I can do it while I'm answering other questions here. But if I go to chef generate cookbook, reuse me, I can show the technique right here very quickly. So reuse me, I'm going to take this resources directory and dump it into reuse me. I'm going to delete the recipes out of reuse me entirely. So this is my reusable cookbook that is shared text. Yeah, I'm going to leave it named reuse me instead of calling it shared. And now, because I moved the cookbook, I got to call it reuse me. You will presumably have a better name than I have come up on the fly. Oh, no, I don't want to regenerate the cookbook. We're going to run the chef client, and first of all, this is going to fail because I haven't actually put the dependencies. So what you do is you create this cookbook that only has the resources or libraries in it. It's a library cookbook, a module, you might say. And then in your metadata, you say you depend on it. Now, what happens is Chef will load, if your cookbook depends on another cookbook, its resources and libraries will guaranteed be loaded before you run. So I know that I know for sure that when I run this, the reuse me website will be there because I depend on it, therefore it will get loaded first. Oh, and I added the you must specify action stuff. But you get the idea. It actually ran my resource. Okay, I'll go to the next question while I'm rerunning that. But depends is good. All right. So there's a question about item potency at the custom resource level. You can reference current So there's a lot of questions around current resource. I think I'm going to skip this one for now. We've talked about how you can actually, like there is a load current resource or load current value helper that you can use to load in stuff. If I can do this. Yeah, I'll just do. So how do you enforce item potency? If you weren't doing a recipe like this, here's the thing you could do. I could read homepage equals io.read bar www site name / index.html. And then what I would do is say title is equal to homepage dot because I have to do this. So what I do is I set title $1, right? I say the load current value, the way that it works. In fact, I'm going to simplify this and pretend that title looks like, sorry to delete things on you while you're going, but this is going to be easier to read. So when you're doing the load current value, what happens is there's this current value concept. So if we want to test whether a resource is the same as it was, and remember right now we're talking about Ruby custom resources and not not the kind of, like the ones that are not using resources, which already have test and set behavior. We want to implement our own. To do test and set behavior, we load the current value into a resource that looks just like ours. So this load current value thing looks a lot like if I were to say reuse me _ website, site one, do all this stuff. and that's intentional. So you just fill in the resource exactly as if, like, it'll automatically fill in the resource with the title and stuff, and then you just fill in the resource the way that you would if you were setting it. And finally, then you can say converge if changed. And converge if changed will compare the current value of title from the system. So it reads the title out of index.html. It will compare it to the title that I said I wanted in my recipe, hi from site 2. And if they're the same, then the test succeeded. Like, it's already, the title is already what I want. I'm not going to do anything. So if it succeeds, it's not going to go in here. If it fails, if the title that I want is hi there, and the title is in that's currently on the disk is go away, then it is going to go in the block and it's going to change the file. Again, I want to be super clear. I'm going to leave this here for now, but this is only something that you need to do if you are writing a Ruby version of a resource. So like pure Ruby. So I'm gonna like distinguish this so that this is our old start right here, and that's all that you generally need to do. But if you are doing stuff that's more advanced, like maybe you want to do an io.write or file.write and such, then you could use converge if change to protect yourself from doing work that you didn't need to do. I've never written an LWRP before. Can I have a Ruby block in a Chef 12.5 custom resource? Yes. So the established way to wrap around existing resources without the need to add custom logic on top of that is through definitions. It is a simplified way to define custom resources meant to deprecate definitions. I don't think we have an official position on it, and I'm going to give you my opinion, which is yes, because like definitions work in a way that is often unexpected. Like I tend to expect a definition not to do anything until much later. But what a definition does is like it won't show you the pretty, it won't do this thing, right? What'll happen is when you run the definition, and if you don't know definitions, don't worry about it and just don't use them, use this. When you run the definition, it gets rid of reuse me website, like that just goes away. It's not even, nobody knows that that existed. That level of encapsulation is gone. And these resources get added to your recipe. So the output gets jumbled, and also these resources get created early at compile time, which is, at least for me, not something I generally expect. The resources, like that recipe in the action there, where I declare those resources, that is not executed until converge time, which means that everything that's happened before you in the Chef recipes is done. Like if you've installed a gem, if you've created the directory, it's already been done before you even get into this action block. So in my opinion, a resource is a lot easier to understand and work within the flow. So yes. Chef does have dynamic, does Chef have dynamic properties? Yeah, you could do this, and that's what a lazy default is. So I can say default is lazy, I don't know, math.random number. You can do that, and what'll happen is when you ask for the title, you get a random number. So lazy is a way of specifying, but if the user sets the title, to be clear, it won't call this. It's only used as the default. And furthermore, it's only used as the default when you're creating a new website. And I don't actually know what the end time is Jamie, so if I am getting close to it, please let me know. Let's see here. What about okay, notification flows. So notification flows, if you're doing a notification, you say we have a notify as restarting here, the notifications currently only apply within the action block. You can't notify to something outside the block, and you can't be notified from something outside of the block. That's something that we would like to fix, but we're like one step at a time. So right now, the notification flow, and for the user who was asking from the context of LWRPs from before, and yeah, that works the way that it worked before. Right on web doc. Oh, okay. I guess we do have in the web documentation the definitions will be deprecated. So yeah, and we've already answered. So yeah, definitions execute in compile time and resources in converge time. Chef Client 12.5 is available today. The process for upgrading is you can use the Chef Client cookbook. You can install the updated package. The risk is that like we went to great pains to make sure that everything was backwards compatible, but there is always risk that something isn't backwards compatible, because if you ever change a single line of code, then the possibility exists that it didn't do what you expected. So the risk is that there will be different bugs than you are used to. Less of the bugs that you already have and more of the bugs that you didn't already have. So far, though, it's been like we aren't getting anything that seems blockery. Multiple bug and documentation errors on the feature, advanced feature, load current value does not work from within an action. I think a bug will help so that we can talk about that more afterwards. If there's something that isn't working, let's talk. Only if and not if conditions apply is for regular resources. These are regular resources, it's just that you are making them. Multi-platform subclass. Okay, I can make an example of that real quick. So this is one where you kind of have to do it in library. So what you're going to see here is my survey. So yeah, we'll have we're going to put in libraries, and what you do is this looks exactly like a regular resource when you're putting in a library, except say we're going to put it in our own module, so it's free use cookbook, and we're going to create a class named website. We're going to extend from chef resource. Resource name, and so we have to do that. This is the boilerplate that you save when you create something in the resources directory. But everything else, I can literally copy and paste everything that is in that file right into here, and everything will work identically. So resource name website means if I type the word website now, it will invoke this resource. Now, what the user's question is, how do I make a resource that that does something different on different OSs? So let's do this. I'm going to very simplify this in the interest of time. Restart service HTTP, and we're going to do one that works on Windows and one that works on Linux, and we're going to make some pretends for the moment. So let's website. So what you do is you make a website underscore Apache, like whatever OS you're on, and a website IIS. like let's say one's on Windows, one of them's on Linux, and we'll assume that we're always using Apache on Windows and using IIS on Linux and IIS on Windows and Apache on Linux and Mac. So we're going to make an actual resource. What we do is we extend the resource and change the action so that it's appropriate just for Apache. So here's what it looks like. Website Apache website. So what I'm gonna do is inherit from website. What that says is I am a website, but I'm gonna change a few things in here. So if someone says website Apache, they can use this resource. But here is the cool thing. Actually, I'll show you the cool thing in a second. So the thing we want to do for Apache is I just changed the website resource, so all it does is create the file. All it does is create the file. It doesn't actually notify anything to restore. We're going to pretend that the website exists in the same place in both Apache and IIS for brevity's sake. And so we do this. This is what we would do in website Apache. We would say, okay, the start action is going to call super. It's going to do the super class, the website version of start first, and then it's going to restart the HTTPD service if subscribes restart is got to be file var www dot site name. All right, so this is going to be an Apache version of it. Now, here's the cool thing about this is you can say I provide website on on Linux, and I can't remember, I think it's Darwin or something, and Mac. So what this says, if someone types website and they are on Linux or Mac OS X, then it's going to use this. So more specifically, if I type this right here in a recipe, if I'm on OS X or Linux, it's going to make one of these. And now I'm going to copy this for IIS. And I'm going to say OS Windows. And we're going to say, like, again, very simplified for what this is, but you can get the idea now. I'm going to restart the IIS service. So this says if I type website, if I like this exact same recipe runs on Windows, it's going to make one of these. What makes this super powerful and interesting, oh, by the way, when you're doing this, you don't want to provide website from the main website resource if you only have subclasses, because then if you're on a weird OS that isn't one of these that you've specified, you don't really want it to make the base class. So what's really nice about this and powerful about it compared to what you had before is before we would always instantiate, basically, we'd make this resource, the website resource, and the actions would be on a different, little separate provider object. So it would do a different job. What you can do now is say, is have specific, since it's instantiating the resource, you can say the IIS site name, right? And now IIS config site name, and totally making shit up here, but right. So now I can say, like, I'm going to configure IIS and set the IIS site name, and you could basically have specific properties that the user can say if they know that they're using the website, the resource on Windows. So they can say this, like IIS site name wow, and maybe they can say, you know, the file primary printer share, you know, the Windows specific stuff. So the user knows a lot of the time whether they're running their thing on Windows or like what OS they're running it on. And they're going to be willing to put the custom properties. This is going to fail if you try to run on Linux, and it should. Like, you can't set a primary printer share that, or it's not, the way that you're doing it isn't going to work on Linux. So that is what makes it powerful and interesting, is the actual properties in the resource can be different depending on what OS you're in.
John,
okay.
looks like we're just about out of time.
Okay, I guess I'll answer the last one then. My config has someone talked about my bash VSH config. I'm using fish shell, which is totally awesome, and you should check it out. So yeah, there's plenty of other questions, and I'm happy to answer more offline or after. I don't know how this works, but this was custom resources, and yeah, I'm sure there will be a lot more questions as time goes by. What we really hope is that, in particular, this will result in much better, more reusable community cookbooks. And some of the first ones that we've implemented are the HTTPD and Chef Docker cookbooks we've converted over to the new resource syntax. The Chef Docker one is a custom resource one. So if you go look at the source for Chef Docker, it's a pure Ruby thing. So you can see that kind. And if you're more interested in the kind of resource that is like, it's just a recipe and you don't have to worry about the extra complexity, the HTTPD resource is like that. And it has this pattern of subclassing the resource for different OSs. So yes, go forth and customize.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will send out a recording of this presentation via email a little later today, and we'll try and get to the rest of the unanswered questions in a follow-up blog post in the next couple weeks. Thanks again for joining us.